Good afternoon, and welcome to the third plenary session, Planes, Cranes, and Lanes, Infrastructure Challenges in Atlantic Cities. My name is Geraldine Gardner, and I'm the Director of GMF's Urban and Regional Policy Program. I'm very pleased to be here today to share a few words about our program and to introduce this important topic. The Urban Program convenes local leaders, policymakers, and practitioners in US and European cities for discussions around pressing urban challenges and their solutions. But we're not just a talk shop. We like to inspire, coach, and help our network understand how to apply what they learn in the transatlantic context to solving challenges in their home communities. Our work has influenced economic development strategies in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've helped to strengthen civic engagement processes in Leipzig and Bottrop in Germany. And our work has even led to the creation of an urban greenway system in Charlotte, North Carolina. But of all the issues that we work on, we feel that urban infrastructure is one that is ripe for transatlantic discussion here at Atlantic Dialogues. And it's something that each and every one of you know a little something about. You turned on your faucet today here at the Sofitel in Rabat. You plug in your cell phone to charge it at night. Some of you may board a bus or bike or commute into your work on the subway. These daily choices in cities all involve infrastructure systems. When they work, we don't think about them. When they don't work, when they're delayed, when they're disrupted, or in places where they simply do not exist at all, the health, vitality, and economic livelihoods of individuals, families, businesses, and cities are profoundly impacted. We simply cannot afford not to discuss, not to debate, not to plan, and ultimately not to invest in these systems. These systems are the skeletons upon which we can build thriving, vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable cities. Cities that people want to live in. So turning to our session today, we are very pleased to have an all-star cast of urban experts from all across the Atlantic Basin. They represent different perspectives on this issue, and we're so very pleased to have them here. But they're not here to talk about whether or not we should invest. They're here to talk about how we collectively get the job done. And to further frame this issue, we'd like to show you a brief video.
According to a 2013 McKinsey and Company report, in order to keep pace with projected global GDP growth, there is a worldwide need for an estimated $57 trillion investment in infrastructure between now and 2030. How can critical infrastructure improvements lay the foundation for the economic competitiveness of Atlantic cities, or in some cases, socio-economic transformation of urban neighborhoods? Can the push for smarter city infrastructure systems improve economic resiliency, social justice, and sustainability? Is it a political myth that infrastructure projects create jobs and opportunity for businesses? In today's times of austerity, how can cities leverage partnerships and/or innovative funding models to facilitate the investment in infrastructure?
I'd now like to invite our panelists to take the stage. And I have the great pleasure of introducing Mr. Andrew Tuck. Andrew is the founding editor of Monocle magazine, an international current affairs and design publication based in London, England, that has championed the urbanism agenda since inception in 2007. Thank you, and welcome, Andrew, and the panelists.
Thank you, Geraldine. Well, she's already done a great job, I think, setting out some of the challenges we face. The clear thing is, infrastructure is what delivers the electricity to your front door. It's what gives you water to run your businesses. It's the veins that run through our cities. It's how you get to work. It's how you move people around your metropolises. And the amazing thing is, done well, cities thrive. Done badly, then they suffer and they die. So what are the choices, and how can we fund the huge projects that many cities need to develop over the coming years? We have an amazing panel here today that can touch on projects all around the Atlantic Basin. Now, before we introduce everybody, I'll just tell you how the panel is going to slightly run. Everyone's going to be asked one brief question, and then I'll be throwing it open to you, the audience. And we've had a slight change. You still type in the questions you'd like to put to the panel on AD Connect, but they're going to be seen in big screen format today. They're going to pop up here on the screen as well. So we'll be checking your spelling as we go as well. I'm Andrew Tuck, and as you've heard, I edit Monocle magazine. I also present a weekly radio show about urbanism around the world. It comes out every Thursday, but you can also get it as a podcast. So that's my background and why I'm keen on this subject. So we'll start with Rachel. Rachel works for the Urban Land Institute. She's based in Washington. She's a woman who knows the theory, but she also knows the practice of transportation and infrastructure. She worked in DC as a transportation expert, and she probably has a few things to say about how that city works. Rachel, I wanted to ask you first, everybody, when they talk about infrastructure, this word sustainability comes up. It's almost meaningless, it feels, in some senses. Everyone bolts it onto their CVs. And it also seems very complicated to develop truly sustainable solutions when you look at the decisions just made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Many of the things we invested in seem redundant now. When you look at cities and you're encouraging them to rethink their infrastructure, how do you really get them to connect with this word sustainability?
Sure. So I work at the Urban Land Institute. ULI is a global network of real estate leaders, both public and private. And our mission is to promote thriving and sustainable cities. So we do a lot of thinking about the connections between infrastructure, economic development, real estate, and sustainability. As folks know, infrastructure, and this has long been known, is a key economic driver. So roads, bridges, our water, wastewater systems, all of those are a competitive advantage or disadvantage for cities globally. Infrastructure sets cities apart. Right now in this economy, cities are not just competing with other cities within their geographic country, but they're also competing globally. And they're competing for economic development, but most importantly, and I think this is often forgotten, they're competing for people. People today are footloose, just like capital. And when people make choices about where they want to live, they want to be in cities that serve them. So they want to be in compact places. They want to be in cities with a mix of uses, all sort of jumbled up. They want to be in places that provide a lot of transportation choices and options, so biking, walking. So young people today are making choices about where they live and where they're going to settle. And so I think sustainability goes hand in hand with that. If we can have as our guiding star for infrastructure investments to think about the needs of people first, that solves a lot of other challenges as well. That means that we're not building cities for the car. We're not building cities around the needs of the automobile, but we're really serving people and what the needs of people are.
Thank you, Rachel. Now, the next person on our panel, I think, would be desperately happy if he could create a walkable, cyclable city core. Philip Yang works in Sao Paulo. He runs Urban, which is trying to rebuild the heart of Sao Paulo. Here's a city which, unlike many of the cities we're seeing in Europe and even in America, its core has emptied out. There's huge problems in the downtown, so many abandoned buildings, and so much potential. And Philip's trying to turn that around. Philip, how does infrastructure potentially help you reinvigorate the core of this huge metropolis?
Yes, my organization recently won a tender. Is it working?
Please go ahead. I think there was a short blip on your sound, but I think we're with you.
Yeah, my organization, Andrew, recently won a tender process in São Paulo to model a design for the expanded central area of São Paulo. And in our model, we favor a new drive towards density. And the infrastructure projects we thought of are meant to build a compact city. So we introduce mixed income. We are introducing mixed income housing in the context of a mixed-use urban fabric, one in which we combine housing with services, with workplaces, with public spaces in the same area. So, and the drive towards density in São Paulo has one reason. São Paulo is the mega city with the largest number, the largest area of underused plots of land in central areas of the city. This is very low density in the core of the city. So we really believe that infrastructure work can help us reinvent in the city towards a more efficient use of land.
Thank you, Philip. The next person on our panel is Jean-Pierre Elong Mbassi. He's the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Government of Africa, and he's also the man behind the Afri-Cities Summit. We were talking earlier today about the fact that there are so many informal settlements here in Africa, and many of those you're having to realize are there to stay, and that they need to be connected to infrastructure in really important ways. How important do you think infrastructure is, not just as a way for a city to function? It's great if it's efficient and we can get around, but how important should the decisions being made about infrastructure be driven by the need to solve poverty, to incorporate people who may literally live on the fringes of a city?
First of all, I want to thank you for addressing cities in Africa. This is new, because in Africa, the feeling is that this continent will come out of poverty through agriculture, through connecting to the world market of commodities. And cities are seen as the proof of the failure of the development agenda of Africa. Secondly, cities in Africa are seen by the citizen as a pale copy of what the city is. You have a colonial city which resembles the European or American city in a way, and we have 70 to 60% of people living in informal settlement. And these informal settlements are very critical for the lives of the people themselves. And these are not equipped. They are left on their own. And the former panel said that informality is the cause of instability. I want to differ a little bit from this affirmation. If 60% of your city is informal, then you have to do something about informal settlement.
Thank you. And the final member of our panel is Dominique Lallement. Yesterday, I suggested to Dominique that she does a huge amount of work around gender and infrastructure. And I kindly said to Dominique, I said, I think maybe one or two people in the audience, and maybe one or two people don't quite understand the connection. She laughed and she said, I think most people don't understand the connection. So hopefully to shed some light on the work. She's a former World Bank member and works now for 3 NGOs. Can you explain to us the link for you between gender, between how we empower women in our cities, and the need for infrastructure?
Thank you, Andrew. We've already mentioned people. As soon as we mention people, we mean women and men. Infrastructure is often thought of being mostly a men sector, and I say no, it's women and men. Infrastructure provides services for women and men. So we need to understand the needs, and the needs may actually differ and the priorities may differ between women and men. Let me give you an example that was reported to us in a conference on gender and infrastructure. In Nigeria, there was a highway built, and the designer of the highway just chose what they thought was the most efficient economic path, except that the highway crossed the village, and there was no access between the settlement and where the market activities took place. Who went to the market? Mostly the women. Who went on the highway? Mostly the men, because they were motorized. So as a result, women had to take an incredibly longer path in order to carry on with their market activities. So we need to understand those needs. But infrastructure is also an opportunity for employment. I think everyone has heard of the rescue packages in various parts of the world, which have generated enormous numbers of jobs. Have women and men had equal access to those jobs? It's yet to be proven. So when we think of gender and infrastructure, we also need to think of the employment creation, the opportunities which are given to women and men to access equally those jobs, for enterprises who are owned and led by women and men to equally have access to the procurement. Another example, PG&E in California has a woman in charge of procurement. And part of the company policy now is to make sure that in all procurement, there will be companies headed by women as well as men. And in new fields like renewable energy, where PG&E is expanding its activities, they have been very successful in actually encouraging a number of women-owned enterprises to come to the fore. Let me mention a third example, and that's very important. We need to think of security in cities. In South Africa, the rate of rapes is one of the highest in the world in cities. Why? For a simple infrastructure reason: lack of public lighting at bus stops. So when we think of infrastructure, we need to think of people, we need to think of their security, and we need to think of the movements of people in a secure way, both for women and men, and this also across generations, young, old, and future generations as well.
Thank you, Dominique. We're going to do a poll in a moment, but I just wanted to have a couple of quick follow-on questions. This is, of course, the Atlantic Dialogues. And Jean-Pierre, I want to ask you, it's always interesting, we're always imagining that the knowledge is always coming to the south, that you're kind of eating up knowledge from the north, how to run your cities. But I wonder if actually there are lessons in more frugal times in the north, as we try to rebuild our cities, that actually people should be coming here to look for the lessons, to Africa to find out how you run a city with actually a little bit less money. And I think you had a good example of something that's been going on in Lisbon, where people are actually coming to Africa to get some advice onto how to use infrastructure afresh.
Well, how to put it? It can be quite long, and we don't have time.
I think we'll go for the short one.
Well, I want to say that all the infrastructure we're using in African cities are imported from the European cities. Meaning, for example, we don't know how long it's going to take to have a centralized sewage system covering the whole city of Kinshasa. which territory is equivalent to Lebanon. So it means that importing the techniques or the technologies as they were experienced in a dense city, in cities of Africa that are sprawled cities, it cannot be something that is sustainable. So we need some rethinking of these technologies. We also need to appreciate what informality brings in the creativity of Africa. They say that Africans are so resilient to the poor conditions that they have something to teach to other parts of the world. And the example I'm going to give is what happened in Portugal. You know, these southern countries of Europe are experiencing what Africa has been experiencing in the 90s, the structural adjustment. And guess what? A public servant in a low public servant, a low middle class, earn now 500 euros per month. And on this, he should also pay his rent, he should pay for the school of his children, and so on. So how to eat in these conditions? These people went to Senegal, Dakar, and saw how much the Senegalese are doing urban agriculture to feed themselves by planting themselves on their terrace, on all the garden that they can have. And they said, well, this is a way to survive in the new Portugal. So they imported some advisors from Senegal and Cabo Verde to teach these people in Lisbon how to grow food in the terrace so that they can survive. This resilience capacity of Africa and the way they organize a social network outside of the stable wage system that we have elsewhere, it brings us to the understanding that something new is emerging from what you call the poor Africa.
Thank you. And a final short one before we do the poll. Philip, you know, an extraordinary 6 months in Brazil. 6 months ago, we thought Brazil was the economic miracle. Nothing could go wrong. Every graph seemed to be pointing up. Suddenly, in over 100 cities, there was urban unrest. And that unrest was triggered by infrastructure. It was people saying, do you know what, I don't want to pay more for buses. I want to be able to get to work. And I deserve a proper transport system. How do you change that? Because what seems extraordinary is Brazil's doing two amazing things. It's building for the Olympics, it's building all these extraordinary things, kind of infrastructure projects, but they don't bring the people along. And it's somehow not putting the money in to changing the city for ordinary people. How do you begin to engage the people who live in those cities so it's them making the decisions, and oddly, not the people sitting in this room?
Thank you, Andrew. You know, I think in any modern society now, good large-scale urban projects, they need to result from the intersection of three powers: political power, economic power, and social, societal powers. So I think whenever one or two of these forces prevail over the other or the others, there will be an erosion of legitimacy, of efficiency, or sustainability of this given project. So I think, you know, the street demonstrations in Brazil are helping us to raise the awareness that this convergence is needed for any given project. And regulations in Brazil are not against this. Actually, they are favoring any PPP project that is run in Brazil requires the participation of public participation in the process. There's a time window in which public is, in which the people is invited to take part in the decision-making process. Of course, this is not enough. And we are trying to devise this into a more inclusive ways of making decisions. And the street demonstrations are clearly pushing the private sector and government towards a more participatory ways of making these decisions.
Right, now we're going to use the AD Connect now, and this is going to be a very good test of how much jet lag you have, because you're only going to have 15 seconds to vote when I tell you vote. So we're going to pull up the question now, I hope. Which side is it going to come? Well, I was promised the question would pop up very quickly. I think it's on its way any second. I have it actually, let's hope it's coming. Maybe it's not coming just yet. So that's the world of AD Connect, not so connected at the moment. So let's instead go to the floor and we'll start taking some questions. If you put your hands up, there's a microphone that we can bring to you. Could we take it first to the gentleman here in the back, please? If you could just say your name and where you came from, and if you fancy standing up so everyone can get a fine view of you, that's all the better.
I'm Roberto Dondich from Mexico. I have two quick questions that I'd love for the panel to address. One of them is how to bring issues like waste management, which are very important, especially in upcoming cities, and how to take advantage of those situations to help the city develop. And the second one is how to best follow up on the idea of not copying systems to upcoming cities, but actually making systems that work for the city. We have some experiences, for instance, in some places where they decided to change pebble streets to concrete streets. And flooding came about when the raining season started, because the pebble streets actually allowed for draining. Those kind of things are technologies that are important and not necessarily the ones that fit the system itself for the city. So I would love to hear in your case about the African cities and how this technology can be incorporated.
Jean-Pierre, would you like to take that question first?
You know, the problem of garbage collection in our cities is a real problem. And this is where also the creativity of African cities can be shown. For example, in the city of Cotonou, they created youth brigades to go and collect garbage in the houses against a small remuneration. But then at the end of the system, you need to dump these things in a very hygienic way, which is not done. And because of the poverty of the city that cannot collect enough taxes attached to the garbage collection. And when we came to a proposal to dump this garbage in an area, the Canadian corporation said, no, we have norms, international norms that you should apply, otherwise we will not support the city. So here also we have some problems in applying the international norms into situations where they cannot be applied because of their cost in the situation. So yes, putting out the garbage from the house is done, but the end of the system is blocked because of this mindset that we need to be at the same level, at the same time internationally. For this is why I said we need a clear rethinking of all these technologies, and we need that the universities work hand in hand with the local leaders to find new ways of adapting the technologies to the situation of African cities. This is, for me, is very clear.
Rachel, just very quickly, the one model fits all. It's a bit of a problem in North America as well. We're seeing everybody talking about smart cities as though a bit of technology is going to solve everybody's problems. Seems to be a few companies selling the same solutions to every city. Do you have the same problem in America, actually, that everyone comes around selling the one solution? When you look at American cities, are you thinking actually city leaders, civic leaders need to come up with their own plans are true for their place, proper placemaking?
Yeah, I think that there's a consistent danger of adopting the latest technology. You know, in the past, that's been automobiles. Now it's technology and sort of smart solutions, so using smartphones and other things to manage infrastructure. And I would just like to pose that, you know, the smartest solution to infrastructure is actually an old school one, which is land use. And a lot of the infrastructure problems that we see are actually land use problems. It's much easier and cheaper to provide infrastructure services to compact cities or cities that have a mix of uses. It's much easier to get around cities that are mixed up. You provide people with a lot of choices. So land use as a solution to a lot of our infrastructure challenges needs to be more integrated into our infrastructure decision making. And the example of, you know, a highway bypassing a town and not serving it is an example of people making decisions about infrastructure without thinking about land use as they're making them.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, there is really no time quickly for the apps at the ready, so we'll quickly do the poll. And as you see, that's the countdown of 15 seconds, which we'll have time for. So a very simple question. In your country, how important is improving urban infrastructure within a public policy context? So is it an important issue that's part of the national dialogue? Is it an important issue but only discussed at the city or regional level? Or is it unimportant? To be honest, there are more pressing problems. So you've got to choose 1, 2, or 3. There's a 15-second countdown, and I think we can start now. It's like doing a game show. And let's see who's going to go home with the prizes. Okay. So interesting, a huge number of you believe it is an important issue, but only discussed at the city or regional level. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about financing, about actually, look at the scale of some of these projects we're trying to achieve. Can you do it without the involvement of the state at a much higher level? And I think most of us tend to agree that perhaps there are some other pressing problems, but this is so interconnected. We've just been discussing, have good lights on the streets, suddenly women feel safe about going out at night. You have security. Infrastructure is about much more than turning on a switch or getting on a subway. So we'll return to the audience. Questions? This lady here, can we bring the mic, please?
Tara Hariharan.
Is it on?
Tara Hariharan, United States. My question is twofold about the shifting roles or responsibilities, A, that the private sector versus the public sector need to take in local infrastructure. And second, you kind of preempted my question, in talking about financing. It seems that cities do have a disproportionate role in developing infrastructure, but often they do not get quite the revenues and resources that they should from the state level. Does there need to be a substantial shift from the states, from the regions, that is from the national levels to the regional and state levels, considering their roles are much more relevant in this context? Thank you.
Dominique, you've been at the World Bank. You've seen a few big checks written over your time. Who should be writing those checks? It's interesting. We try to push these decisions down to the city level. There's lots of talk about cities being kind of their own mini states these days. But when you look at some of the money that's being asked to be invested, and if we want it to be a really connected decision for a country, who should be paying? Should it be the state? Should it be the city? Or in fact, should it be private enterprise? Because actually, when you look at many city halls, do they have the know-how even to make the right decisions about those investments?
2 points on this. When we say the state, we basically say the citizens who pay their taxes. So it's a question of who pay the taxes. And you pay the taxes whether at the national level or the regional level or the local level. So at the end of the day, I think it's the people who have to also have an opportunity to express their views as to the use of their taxes. Now, some of my colleagues here on the panel have more experience than I do on how to tap the voice of the people to make those choices. I think the second point is, I think for the projects themselves, I see the partnership between the public and the private sector very important. And in terms of the ability of looking at land use, and I've seen in particular in the United States, I think some very successful examples of public-private partnerships for the redevelopment of certain areas.
Thank you, Dominique. More questions. Is there anybody up here? I'll take this lady, the lady here. Could we pass the microphone this way, please? Can we get the microphone over here, please? Do you mind when it gets to you? If you could just pop up and say where you're from.
Hello, I'm Fatin Zara from Morocco. I think that for Africa, and as what you were saying, local solution could be, instead of copying what's happening in the West, we should really think about our local problems and see how they can be solved. And I think that a bottom-up approach is very important, because now we can see a lot of small companies, like startups, that are inventing some solutions to help cities. And how can we reinforce the role of startups and education and universities in this, in solving these local challenges?
I wonder, actually, both Philippe and Jean-Pierre will come to you quickly on this. Actually, we'll start with you, Jean-Pierre. So here in Africa, huge numbers of people living in informal communities, not employed by big industry. They're having to make their own money if they can. They are effectively self-employed. They're all effectively startups. How do you empower people with infrastructure? How do you make it possible for people who live in those communities to run their businesses?
The key word is people. And any company to understand that the key word is people, adapt to the needs of the people. I take the example of Safaricom in Nairobi, in Kenya. When they saw that all the informal settlement, they did these small vendors, women in the markets, wanted to make transactions and they don't have a bank account. They created a bank account through the mobile phone. And every woman now in the market has his bank account in her mobile phone. So this is the way the private sector can boost, through people-centered attention, can boost the economy, because the informal economy is what keeps the African city grow. It's not the formal one. The formal is 70% of the people, and the informal is the bulk of it. So centered to what these informal people need, you have a capacity of responses from the private sector. But they should not do one solution fits all. They should adapt to the local conditions.
Philip, for you, what's interesting is we were saying that if you look at North American cities or European cities, you're seeing this migration of people into the city core. Young people in many of those cities don't want to own a car. They want the city to be walkable. They want to be able to get around by bike. And that's a new generation of people who come in to run new technologies, new businesses. When you look at that heart of downtown Sao Paulo, you've got so much empty space. But do you have the infrastructure that would attract those people? Do you have, in fact, even the basics like the Wi-Fi, the technology that young startups need in Brazil?
Well, I think the bottleneck for implementing some of the solutions.
Sorry, is your mic on?
Hello?
You're good.
From a Brazilian perspective, from the São Paulo perspective, I think the main bottleneck for implementing those technologies is not the technologies themselves, but access to capital. I think any bottom-up solution coming from innovators have to face the difficulties of access of capital. Brazil has a quite decent capital market, but it's not as mature as in more mature societies such as the United States or in London. So once we are able to solve this, and once we are able to also to enable more enforced intellectual property rights on innovation, I think these technologies and this infrastructure will be in place in São Paulo.
One more question. The lady here, sorry. Can we get the mic here, sorry?
Hello, my name is Ana Maria. I'm from Mexico. My question is about mobility. Operation is a concept that unifies all the aspects of road management. You know, road safety, ITS, everything that maintenance. And this concept generates data of the area that is being operated and generates a base to make decisions, well-informed decisions. And in my experience, decision makers aren't even familiar with the concept of operation. Why does this happen, and what can we do to change this problem?
Rachel, would you like to pick that one up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I do think that a lot of times the infrastructure discussion is dominated by considerations of the upfront capital costs that go into infrastructure. So how do you pay for the new road? How do you pay for the new airport? And really, infrastructure is a long-term proposition, and that's the proper way of thinking about it. So decisions that get made about infrastructure today will impact a region and a country for the next 50, 100, 150 years. So we can't just think about how do you pay for the upfront capital costs. You also have to think about where money for operations and maintenance will come from. Where will the funding to renew the infrastructure or replace it in the future come from? Those are really critical, important discussions. A lot of times the upfront discussion is about jobs and how many jobs an infrastructure investment can create. And jobs are important, but the longer term question is, how well does this infrastructure investment position a region for the future? And how will this infrastructure investment play out in terms of operations and maintenance over the long term? There are a lot of new strategies for optimizing infrastructure operations. A lot of those strategies are using a combination of technology and pricing. And those things can help optimize the use of the infrastructure and also help pay for the infrastructure over time. But certainly operations, maintenance, thinking about the long term are things that are often neglected in the infrastructure discussion.
There's a good and slightly controversial point come up here in one of the questions. If cities grow faster than their problems, shouldn't we aim to discourage migration to cities? I think there's probably got some strong views here on the panel. That's from Michelle Hymans. Can I see a hand for Michelle? Who was Michelle? Okay, brilliant. What's fascinating is, we look at what's happening in some of the Chinese cities, and I wonder if that offers, a top-down template for some cities in the developing world. Because what's amazing is we're very critical of it, but you go to Chinese cities, and they've had the forethought to think, actually, the city is going to expand by this acreage over the next 10 years. Let's already put in the subway lines, literally have a station almost in the middle of a field, because we know the city will expand over that. It's so much cheaper to put in the network and admit your city is going to expand by 1 million people, rather than be hesitant, allow informal settlements to grow, and then try and put in the infrastructure. It's a completely backwards way of thinking. It's lucky if you're in a sense if you're in a state like China where you can make that decision and make it happen very quickly. But I wonder, look, we're not going to stop people migrating to the cities, but do we need to think a bit clever and think, actually, all these people are coming to our cities. How do we put in the infrastructure cheaper and admit that these cities are going to change? Dominique?
For a very long time, I've been really interested in the issue of rural-urban migrations. And however, how many efforts have been made to invest in the rural areas with the hope of slowing the rural-urban migrations. And it seems that none of these efforts have actually enabled even to slow down the rates of rural and urban migrations. So that leaves me with the belief that it is better to anticipate the rate of growth of cities and prepare the cities to welcome the migrants with the migration, with the infrastructure for the migrants. It doesn't mean to neglect the rural areas, but putting the infrastructure for the new migrants is, in my view, critical.
Rachel, just you, we should bring in the North American example here. I guess what's also interesting for you is that just ain't going to happen in North America. You have so many people who have, want to have a part of the decision, that they want to be their citizens groups, their city organizations, their lobbyists. When you see the process of putting in new infrastructure in American cities, we look in an airport in London, it's taken 15 years of discussion about whether we should build one extra runway. It will take another 20 years potentially for it to happen. That's a very different discussion to what we're talking about, potentially happening in Africa, potentially happening in Asia. Do you feel frustrated by that, or do you feel that is citizen empowerment and that's just the way it goes?
Yeah, I have faith in some of the systems. I know that it takes a lot longer potentially, but I actually believe that the process for making decisions about infrastructure projects and engaging the public, not only is it the right thing to do, it actually ends up with better decisions at the end of the day. And so where in North American cities where major, bold infrastructure investments are being made, so thinking about $40 billion for transit in Los Angeles, for example, which will completely transform the way that city functions. Many billions of dollars going into transit in Denver. All of those efforts have been top-down, so they've required the political leadership from mayors and other civic leaders. They've been bottom-up, so they've required strong grassroots support from folks that are interested in sustainability and the environment and equity, the advocacy community, and they've also required the engagement of the private sector and the business community, property owners, land use owners that are contributing to funding the infrastructure and supporting the efforts to propel the projects forward.
Brilliant. Rachel, is another question? The lady with the red dress here at the back. If you could just say your name and where you're from.
My name is Sisonke, and I'm from South Africa, from Johannesburg. So my question is actually related to this issue about gender. So in South Africa, one of the things that's happened is the city of Joburg has decided to invest in communal toilets, which obviously has a huge impact in terms of women's safety. So last week we had and children's safety. So last week we had a very difficult episode where 2 toddlers were killed at a set of communal toilets, right? So it demonstrates, some of the difficulties there. That would never happen to my children because I'm a middle-class South African who has a toilet in her home, right? So one of the questions I have is that if we talk about infrastructure investment, the social unrest that you referred to earlier is actually often about deeply embedded inequalities within cities. And I wonder what we do about that. And I wonder what thoughts you have about how we address the politics of how these decisions get made and how communities are left behind.
Dominique, I think that question has your name firmly attached to it.
I think this is a very challenging question because basically you are asking how can we correct for inequalities to start with, and how municipal leaders can actually develop a consensus to reallocate resources, from the most prosperous segments of the population to the more disadvantaged people. There are examples which I think are worth thinking about. For example, in the city of Lima, and I make the link here with the previous question on migration. I think it's one of the few cities in the world, and I see my colleague, Mrs. Quesides, in the audience. She may be able to bring us more information on this. But the city of Lima has had a policy to provide minimum of infrastructure almost in anticipation of the migratory process, with the results that they are basically able to keep up with basic services in areas, providing water, sewage, minimum of lighting and roads. And with the results that the migrants come in and they start with a modular home, but they will have all these basic necessities from the start. Now, when you develop a new area, in a way, this is easier than when you have to do some retrofitting. But turning to the experience in Brazil, this is an issue on which Brazil has been working for decades and decades. And if you go today and visit what is still called a favela, but has nothing to do with the favela of 30 years ago, some of the favelas today, which have benefited from these upgrading programs, are actually what in many other parts of the world would be considered as middle-class environments. So from these experiences, I think I drew two conclusions. One, that the city councils, and in some cities, it requires a group of municipalities to get together to be able to make those decisions on resource allocation and to develop this vision and commit to this vision long term. And secondly, that when you do it, you can actually correct for some of these inequalities.
Thank you. I know that we've only got 6 minutes left, and I know that I'll be in trouble if I stand between 300 delegates and their lunch. But I just wanted to say that I know that part of the discussion we were having before we came on, which also addresses your point, which is fascinating, is that yes, there are informal neighborhoods, but what's amazing is there's also informal infrastructure, whether we like it or not. Those people are tapping into the electricity, they're adding to the water. Those things are there whether you build them or not. And I wonder if the solution to a lot of that is actually listening to those people. They know what the services are that they need. You only have to go there to see what the priorities are. And I don't think you have to kind of bring in big institutions to start telling you how to run that. Now, we've got two little bits of business before we get to the end. We're going to see if we've managed to change your opinions even a little bit. We're going to return to the poll. So if you could go back to AD Direct. You voted once before. I'm afraid it's exactly the same question that's going to pop up again. But we just want to see if we've managed to shift your thinking a bit and the discussion about the transatlantic possibilities. Should people in Latin America be coming here to Africa to find out what the solutions are? Should people in North America even be coming here to find out how you can run your infrastructure more nimbly and more efficiently? So at what level should we be discussing approaches to improving urban infrastructure? Is this really on a global level? Do we all find best practice around the world? Should it certainly, and we're here for the Atlantic Dialogues, be transatlantic? Should the people here in Bamako be getting on a plane to Sao Paulo? Should the people in Sao Paulo be getting on a plane to Spain? Or is it national, city and regional? And if you can't make your mind up because you're desperate for that lunch, you can choose all of the above. So go for whichever one you fancy. So you've got 15 seconds. Fingers on the button. There's no prize at the end, but here we go. There we go. All of the above. I thought you were the decision makers. Little did I know. It's time to conclude. You know, it's been an amazing panel. There's so many more questions here in the room to be asked. The good thing is, these people are also hungry, so they're going to be hanging around for lunch. Feel free to pin them in a corner and ask them what you want to know. I haven't given you a chance to touch on half of the stuff that you know. Rachel, a quick conclusion for you, about today and about what you think is the key thing these people should go away thinking about infrastructure when they leave the room.
Yeah, my 3 takeaways when it comes to infrastructure is that we should be building infrastructure for people, not for cars or for the latest technology. That land use is an infrastructure solution, and then we should be thinking about land use and infrastructure together whenever we're thinking about infrastructure, and that we need to think in the long term about infrastructure, that infrastructure is a long-term investment for cities, and short-term considerations, political considerations, shouldn't drive the train.
And Jean-Pierre, I know that you've just in the last week, you've been in Paris, you've been in Hamburg, you've been traveling around Africa. You're seeing best practice and worst practice every day. What do you think these people need to know as they leave the room?
Infrastructure is local. First, people-centered. Second, should be sustainable in a way to have a low-carbon path to the development of infrastructure. Because the way infrastructure has been developed in the developed world is not sustainable. So thinking infrastructure in the South should draw lessons from the failures of the North, so go to a low carbon path infrastructure. But finally, retrofitting is the only way, because the speed of urbanization in Africa is such that you cannot plan ahead to the speed that the urbanization is taking. So retrofitting, unfortunately, is the solution.
Dominique, the people here who can affect the lives of many women around the world in their decisions about cities, what's the thought that you'd like to leave them with?
2 thoughts. First, I want to stress the question of intergenerational equity. If women don't have equal access to infrastructure as men, they will remain in the vicious circle of poverty. There is documented evidence that when women and girls cannot attend school because they have to go and fetch water or fuel wood, etc., that the fact that they did not attend school will lessen their chances to access higher paying jobs and therefore provide better education and life for their children. So I think that infrastructure has to be thought and linked to enabling women out of poverty. The second thought is about pollution and climate change, which we have not touched upon in this discussion. But I think it is important that the infrastructure models that we develop do take into consideration the impact on the environment, whether it's the local environment in terms of pollution and all its health impact, and the global environmental impacts in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, to have livable cities, to have livable models and sustainable models of infrastructure.
And Philip, I'm afraid I'm going to have to get you to do this in a very succinct few words, but you're the man on the ground, you've got your sleeves rolled up, you're fixing the centre of Sao Paulo. What's your lesson for everybody?
I think there are 2 lessons in Sao Paulo. One is that we need to think first of the spatial organization prior to thinking of infrastructure. And this is very important. We cannot think of a housing project without thinking of how it will be placed within a larger context of the geography of the city. and how it relates vis-a-vis the urban mobility systems already in place. The second one is that we really need to think and promote the convergence of the three powers: political power, economic power, and societal forces. If we do not converge, nothing will happen, and the projects will not be successful.
Brilliant. Well, I think we'd all like to say a huge thank you to Rachel, to Jean-Pierre, to Dominique, and to Philippe for their amazing views. And thank you all for having such great questions and being a great audience.
And thank you. That was a really great session. We're getting ready now to go to our lunches. You'll get a chance to see Rabat. When you head out the door, steer towards the lobby. You'll be given instructions of how to get on your transportation to go off to lunch. And we'll see you back here later this afternoon for the next session. What? Oh. On your name tag, there's a number. And that's where you're going to lunch. So look for your number when you get outside. I knew there was a system. Thank you. Have a good time.